Hey everyone, welcome back to another video tutorial, and in today's video tutorial we are continuing with the topic of algorithm. In our last video tutorial we identified two ways that we can use to represent an algorithm. The first was by the use of a flowchart, and the second one was through the use of a pseudocode. Now for this video presentation, we will be proceeding to the pseudocode aspect of our algorithm. Now, what is a pseudocode? First and foremost, a pseudocode is a way that we use to represent an algorithm. So in other words, it is just another method that is used to solve problems that we encounter as it relates to algorithm. It is also considered to be a tool that is used to write a preliminary plan that can be developed into a computer program. So before we actually write a program that can be completed on a computer system, we normally complete the pseudocode before, just to imitate what that actual program will be like. A pseudocode cannot be executed on a real computer, reason being it is just an imitation of what an actual program will look like. So just as how we have blueprints for buildings, the pseudocode is just a similar aspect. Right, keywords that we will encounter as it relates to pseudocode. So these are some of the terms that we will be seeing: the read, write, input, display, store, output, if then statements, if then else statements, for loop, while loop, among others. So these are the main ones that we have outlined. Parts of a pseudocode. Now, in order for us to be able to know how we are able to go about solving problems, we would like to identify the different parts that makes up a pseudocode, and also just to give us a structure to follow whenever we are solving our problems. So one of the parts that we have for the pseudocode is the header. Another part is the description, a declaration, initialization, the body, and finally the terminator. Now, where the header is concerned, this is the section that provides a title of the pseudocode. The description, it gives us an overview of what problem exists and what is the purpose of the pseudocode in terms of solution. The declaration is the part that allows us to identify variables and data types, and we'll also look at these further down. Initialization, this is when we assign default values to variable names that were previously declared. And in our body section, this is the main part of our pseudocode, and it is made up of what we call control structures, and this outlines the sequence or the steps that we will follow in order to solve the problem that was identified. And then finally, having completed all of those sections, we would have what we refer to as a terminator, which indicates that we have come to the end of our pseudocode and the problem solving phase. So these are the main parts of our pseudocode, and then we will recognize these in examples that we will be completing further on. The body of a pseudocode. So this, we're going to be looking at the different parts that makes up the body of a pseudocode. So it is made up of what we refer to as control structures, and the three main control structures that we will be identifying throughout are the sequential, the decision, and the loop or the repetition control structures. Now we will proceed to look at each of these and what they entail. The first in the list is the sequential control structure, and as the name suggests, sequential meaning that we are proceeding in a step-by-step manner, and it is also the most basic structure from the list of three. Another thing is that it is a logical, meaning that just as how we would have a straight line moving in a vertical direction, this is just the way the sequential structure works. Here we're going to be starting from step 1, proceed to step 2, step 3, and we're following that particular order. And then this to my right is an example of how this structure works and how it is normally laid out. So we have our begin line followed by our first task or step 1, second task or step 2, third task or step 3, and if we have more tasks, the list will continue until finally when we are ready to end, we will finalize on that note. Some of the parts of a sequential control structure. So these are the items that we come across whenever we're writing our sequential control structure. We have what we refer to as input statements, output statements, right? We have statements involving arithmetic operations, and the fourth one on the list, statements that assigns values to variables. Again, we will be looking at each of these, so we're just getting the overview, and then we will break these down further on in our example. Parts of the sequential control structure. So we're looking at the 4 that were in the list. So input statements, examples, some of the key terms that are associated with our input statements are to get. So if it is that we want to get a number from a user, then we would use the keyword get. Also, we can use a read, right? So if there is a product that we want to get the price for, then we would outline or indicate this by reading that price. Another keyword or input statement is the accept, right? So the second part of these are examples, and then the first terms are considered to be the input statement. So get, read, accept, enter, and read again or input are normally terms that we see, and these we would know that these are input statements. Second part of our sequential control structure would be, or a second part, output statements. So some terms similar to our input statements, but these would give us an output or give the user an output. So terms print, sum, display, these are two of the main ones as it relates to the pseudocode aspect. Third item, the statements involving arithmetic operations. So this is also similar to those that we would normally see in math. So wherever we're finding sum, we know that the formula would be, if it is two numbers, then it would be the first num or num1 added to the second number, which would in this example, if we are finding the average, then there is also a formula to find this inclusive of mathematical operations. So in this example, to find the average, it was sum divided by 2. Another arithmetic operation, the product, we have num1 times or multiplied by num2. Right, so these are examples of types of arithmetic operations that would take place in our sequential control structure. Our fourth item on the list, statements that assigns values to variables. For example, if we were doing a count, right, normally we start off with default values, or if we were provided with value, then we would replace it with the default 0. So count is currently assigned the value 0 in the case where someone was counting a certain number of things, then the value that they started off in this example would be 0 until they begin the actual count. The second example is maximum. So let's say they gave us 16 to be the maximum number of students in a class, for example, then we know that this was the number that they assigned to this variable. Minimum, just the same, what would be the least? So they gave us a number here, and we know that this would be 14 as the minimum number. Second part of our body is what we refer to loop or repetition control structure. What we mean by this is that in a part of our pseudocode, there are certain things that will be repeated, and in that case, we would require what we call a loop or repetition control structure. There are three types of control structure that we use in this pseudocode throughout our process: for loop, while loop, and the repeat until loop. And again, these are used to allow for statements to be repeated a fixed number of times, or a number of times that we're not clear as to what the final figure or what the total count time would be. In a case where it is fixed, the number of times would be given a certain number. So let's say they wanted to run a program 10 times, then we know that that was a fixed number. But if they were collecting for a large number of persons, then they would refer to this as unfixed or unconditional loop. All right. Also, whenever we know the number of repetitions that are supposed to take place ahead of time, we refer to this as counted loop. The example in this would have been the for loop. All right, so that was the loop or the repeat control structure. The third one is the selection or the decision control structure. Now for this, we have the key terms that we will be looking at, which are the if then or if then else statements, right? So this is used to make a decision between two or more things, right? So the example here, in the case of the if then statement, the decision is made based on some condition that eventually evaluates to true. The if then else statement is the alternative, so this would continue until the condition is technically wraps up our introduction to pseudocode, and then from here we will begin to look at each of these control structure and also examples of writing pseudocode. Thank you very much for tuning in, and please stick around for the next video tutorials to come.